I always say that I'm an animal guy who plays with cameras
Okay.
because it's definitely animals first, 100%. Snakes came before anything. I was probably similar to you guys. I was a young kid. At first, the only other obsession I had in life was trains. Don't know why. I loved trains as a kid. I could care less now. I don't know anything about trains at all.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Reptile Studio podcast with me, Greg, and Brian from the Reptile, or from, what are you? You are from Hudson
Brian
Valley.
from Hudson Valley Reptile
Yeah,
and Rescue.
Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue. And today we are joined by Ian Breland. Is that how you say your last name, Breland?
Yep,
Yeah, so Ian
perfect.
Breland. He's on Instagram, uh, Life with Eland, right?
Life
Life
of
of
Ian.
Ian. Yeah, Life of
Yeah.
Ian on Instagram. He's a conservation photographer, videographer, and I'm sure some other things. So I don't know, Ian, if you want to give us a little introduction about who you are.
Yeah, so right now I'm kind of stretched in a million different directions. I'm trying to figure out what is the most effective or best way forward, but I've kind of tried not to keep all my eggs in one basket as I develop. So videographer, full-time freelancer, in here in Phoenix and then across the country. I got to LA a lot, sometimes the East Coast. Smaller companies, I kind of fit that niche as far as my actual making ends meet and paying bills of being like a small time videographer, one man team, producer, director, editor, everything for smaller productions because I don't have a huge workforce to pay or anything. So it actually works out pretty well for me. And then I can work with like mom and pop shops from anything from like biking studios or gyms or zoos, small zoos like the Rattlesnake Ranch out here or Phoenix Herpetological Society. All these places are places I would appeal to. I try to stay conservation oriented, but a lot of nonprofits, as I'm sure you especially know, your reptile and rescue center, they don't have much income. So I had to diversify my portfolio by doing things I don't really love, but it pays the bills. And then that allows me to expand and reinvest where I moved into actual filmmaking. Um, Kind of fill a niche in that regard where I film rare, less common, harder to find snakes across the world. Wherever I go, I usually try to get really crispy, good 4K, 60 frame footage, and then I sell it to independent documentaries. So that's kind of one way that I am developing myself in that region. But we also made our own show, Serpentine, which is on Carbon TV, and that was one season, 10 episodes. We went to Guatemala, Peru, Ecuador, some locations in the U.S. I think that was it. But it was a fine mixture, I would say, of like non-professional, totally terrible, shaky GoPro footage, and then like cinematic, kind of beautiful footage. So it was
Nice.
very experimental, but it was awesome. It's gotten us a lot of exposure. It's an actual show that we can say we made because it's on a streaming
Yeah.
network, but at the same time, it's nothing like being on Netflix or something. So we have a long ways to go. But then I'm also an expedition guide. That's probably my most fulfilling role right now. I lead tours in Zimbabwe and Peru for herping, but we're diversifying that too. We're trying to expand, which I can talk more about later. But yeah, I just got into all these things that kind of snowballed into each other. They're all related somehow. And I'm
Yeah.
just at the moment trying to gain traction and reinvest and keep going until I can make ends meet with the stuff that I love. So.
Are you trying to diversify more, or are you trying to streamline the process and kind of keep keep one of those things as your main breadwinner or situation that you want to pursue the most?
Right now, it is more of streamlining and scaling. Ideally, videography and, well, ideally filmmaking, which is, I guess, a lot of people think it's like the same thing, and it is in a
Right.
way. but typically in the industry itself, like you're going to see videographers as more of like they would be maybe considered the janitor of the
Right,
video
right, right,
world,
right,
whereas like filmmaking is like the mechanic of like the world
right.
of that industry. So it's definitely the higher end. It means you really know what you're doing. You're into more cinematography. You're way more your abilities are more profound what you can accomplish. So that's where I would love to go with wildlife only. And then expedition guides, we're actually building a site right now. We're starting our own company. But beforehand, I've worked as a contractor for two other companies. So I know my way around. Right now, I'm actually working with REI too, here in Arizona and California, their Southwest region, as a guide, just to get a better idea of how big corporate entities run their expeditions. Because I've usually worked with the smaller companies when I'm a contractor in Peru or Zimbabwe. But we're building our site right now. It's going to be called Serpentine Expeditions, and that's going to have really obscure, rare destinations. That's what we're going to cater to, but also more affordable. So we're trying to cater to the guy that just graduated maybe with his degree and he's 100 or 80K in debt and he's working a 50K income job, but still wants to explore the world because his passion
Right.
is field herping. So we would love to cater to that, but also allow for like the herpers that have been in the game for a long time and they're almost like anti-tour, because like I mean I am too. Like I wouldn't really pay to go on tours. I just like to lead them typically, unless it's somewhere crazy that is literally inaccessible. Besides going with this operator, so that's what we want to do. We want to be able to offer tours with our contacts in China, like for the Mangshan viper. We want to go to Iran, find spider-tailed horn vipers, like top of the tier, best herping that no one really knows how to get to those snakes or what they
Right.
would even do. Like the first step in a million logistical problems to go
Right, right.
find this
Who
spider
who's
horn
your who's your
viper.
first phone call in that situation, right? You want to fill that role. You want to be that first phone call and make it happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that would be
So
incredible.
that's the dream. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
So
that's
I
that's
got a
at this
awesome.
question.
point, hmm,
Did reptiles come first, or did the filmmaking come first, or videography come first? What was your passion first?
I always say that I'm an animal guy who plays with cameras
Okay.
because it's definitely animals first, 100%. Snakes came before anything. I was probably similar to you guys. I was a young kid. At first, the only other obsession I had in life was trains. Don't know why. I loved trains as a kid. I could care less now. Like I don't know anything about trains at all, but I used to want to be a conductor like so bad, and I would go talk to all these train conductors at like nursing homes because my mom was a psychotherapist out there in Wyoming. They tell me all these crazy stories about how they like had near death experiences on the railroads. So that had me all pumped up. And then as I got a little older, like we're talking like 5 years old to like maybe when I hit 7 years old, then I found garter snakes in our front yard in Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's where I was growing up for my younger years mostly, and caught my first garter snake. I was hooked. His name was Slinky. He was a plains garter snake, and I didn't know anything. I like didn't know I thought they took in water vapor from the air, so they didn't have to drink. And then I thought they ate hot pockets, so I'm like trying to feed him like the ham out of a ham and cheese pocket. It was terrible, and he's just slowly like wasting away. So my mom made me release him, and I still feel bad to this day, but he did kickstart my inferno of love for snakes and reptiles. So after that, it was nonstop. I didn't even know how to read really before that because I didn't care about anything. And then I learned about snakes, and I was reading like Nat Geo magazines every night before bed. Um, caught my first snake with no help. I remember in Lyons, Colorado, at a music festival. Still have a picture on our fridge of me like holding it up across the river. It's like a little garter snake. And that was like such an adrenaline rush when I did that because I was like, I think it's a garter snake, but I'm not positive. And is it gonna get away? And I like jumped on it, and when I saw it in my hands, it was just like game over. So since then, it's just escalated. I started doing annual trips out here to Arizona the day I got my driver's license, 16, and then had my friends. They were into it about as much, to a degree, most of them. And we would just pool all of I worked as a lifeguard every summer. And then even during the school year, after school, I would work till 10:30 p.m., save up all the money, and then I would just drop like $1,500 in gas, driving all across the Southwest, finding all the lifers that we've ever dreamed of, and then go back home and do it again. So now it's just a matter of keeping that going in the adult world.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's funny too. Like telling the story about between like the trains and like
Hmm.
the garter snake and like the mistakes that you made, being a young kid,
Yeah.
husbandry wise, like our stories are so interlocked in that it's crazy. Like the train thing, like
Mm.
I had like little train, tracks and stuff as a kid, like like battery operated or like remote control or something. And I remember going to a train museum, all kinds
Yeah.
of, different things like that with trains.
Oh, that's crazy.
And then like, with the, I started herping young before I knew it was herping, and, would take in, things from the wild, not knowing what I was doing. Um, and then like mistakes wise, like I caught a water snake when I was like 10 years old, and I put it in a little fish tank outside just with water and nothing else.
Oh man.
And I mean, obviously that's not that's not a
Just gonna
smart thing to
drown.
do. Um, but I just want, it's pretty awesome, how, a lot of our lives in reptiles, in the reptile like industry and stuff sort of intertwine like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and it kind of keeps me on track. Like I always think as a gauge of where I'm going, if I'm going the right direction, like would 10-year-old Ian be
Yep.
proud of this guy, or like would he look up to this dude? And then if the answer is yes, then it's keep going that direction. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
That's
an
very
awesome
similar to me.
philosophy.
I do the same thing. Yep. I always check back with my child self to make sure I'm doing what I would have done as a child, You got to
totally.
appease that child inside you. Make sure you're on the right track and doing what he would have done, because that's the true nature of oneself, right?
It is, yeah. All the other layers, they're just added through real life. So
Yep. Whether
you
it's
gotta
negative, positive interactions with other people, whatever, that's all the world manipulating you. Go back to that childhood understanding of life, and you'll do great things like you do.
absolutely.
If
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
you Go ahead, Greg.
I was gonna say, so as far as the expeditions, out of the two, what is it, you said, Zimbabwe and
I'm in
what's the other
Peru
one?
mainly right now.
Yeah, and Peru. Like, what do you have a favorite between the two of those? Because they're very different.
Yeah, so Zimbabwe is a relatively new development. I actually made that connection. I always wanted to herp it. I always wanted to go there. It seemed remote to me. It seemed like a place people don't really do. They do South Africa, they do Namibia, they do North Africa, Morocco, but no one really does like the Kalahari, the moist savannas of Zimbabwe, because there's no one has connections out there really, and especially in the reptile community, there's not like really a venom lab or a rehab center. You have like little
Right.
off the road like shops with snakes in terrible conditions, but you don't really have any places where someone can go and like do an internship, or where they could go just survey the herpetofauna in the parks there. So I actually ended up going out there in 2021, I believe. It was just a job. I was working, filming a hunt. I do that as a lot too. I film hunts for a few different hunting shows, and we travel around the world doing that. So I knew when I went there, it was their winter time, which gets really cold in Zimbabwe, actually. It gets like frosting over. Some of the water even freezes, and yet there's like now crocodiles in there, which is so weird.
Yep.
But I was even finding herps there. I was finding like monitors. I found some rufous beaked snakes that were like two males in combat on the road. And I was like, this is like 60 degrees in the winter here. Like
Yep.
imagine what we could do in the summer. And if I brought a group of herpers here and like we just, because I'm not even herping, I'm just filming this dude hunt and I'm like still finding stuff on my off time. So I got to be friends with this whole hunting group. They're actually like a lodge that harbors even trophy hunters, like the big bad guys that everyone hates who kill elephants and lions. But
Right.
I was like, instead of just writing them off and hating them, because we weren't there hunting those, we were hunting for meat. We were hunting sable, kudu, and impala there for like 2 weeks, and all very well managed animals. They're at the Africa Center for Holistic Management, which is a place that actually does like rotational grazing, which is kind of a bastardization of the process. It's actually really, really crazy, unique, and they have all kinds of informants and ways to analyze their habitat and make sure that it's actually they're basically rotating. They have cattle on the land and they graze them in a certain way to where they keep the ecosystem even healthier than the surrounding ones. And it's a huge area. I don't know how many hectares. It's got to be at least 10,000 hectares. But they're essentially they're essentially imitating with the cattle megafauna that used to exist there that humans have since killed off, to help the roots of all the grasses and the plants there grow into their original forms, like deeper, more seasonal, more reliant. They hold more water because they have a very brittle landscape, meaning when the rainy season isn't there, then it gets really dry, just stupid dry.
Yeah.
Like there's no water for months, and the surrounding areas are become they're desertifying, if you've ever heard that term.
Yep.
And yeah, and people think that that's normal. They're like, yeah, well, it's sub-Saharan, it's just supposed to be desert, but it's actually totally not. It's supposed to, the landscape is designed from evolution with megafauna to be trampled every year, but not over trampled, and
Right.
hold moisture better, and then be able to get through the dry season with moisture in the roots in the soil. But that doesn't really happen anymore. So these cattle are actually moved around this hunting zone, and they keep it really healthy because of that. So you have a lot that there's not gated, there's no fence whatsoever. And any of the most of Zimbabwe, actually, all the property, the private property, is ungated. There's just a map that you would have to tell whose property you're on. And this area, even from above, you can see like green grasses and lush forest. It almost looks like the Congo. And then you see the next door neighbors that don't have cattle
It's
and they
nothing.
don't have as many
Yeah.
elephants as they should. And their ground is getting trampled and it looks dry, even in the rainy season. So it's a great place to herp. And I saw that value there. So got the guys. I was like, hey, I'm gonna be back here as soon as possible with the group, and I'm gonna bring you guys money. Just charge us what you would hunters, but obviously not hunters that are like paying to shoot an elephant because that's like 50 grand. But just
Right.
charge us what we would charge to stay there and for you to guide us, give us gas, give us vehicles. And then we came back finally just 3 weeks ago, beginning of February or end of January. Um, and we had a great time. It was definitely harder herping than expected, but it was amazing. We were working through super green, lush forest, just finding leopard tortoises, all these different
That's
frogs. I
awesome.
didn't even think of the amphibians, but it's peak rainy season there. So we were getting rained out often, which was bad from a snake standpoint. But we were finding all these crazy, weird frogs that I've never even heard of or seen photos because no one herps there. So I think it's going to grow into something really good. Hopefully, we already filled our next two trips in November,
Nice.
which is going to be more of a snake oriented trip because that's in their spring, in
Right.
November. So they'll be not having as much foliage. That was actually our problem on their property. It was just too much. It was too good. So, when you have too much of a good thing for herping habitat wise, it can actually be really hard to find animals sometimes.
Hmm.
So we're going to try to get there when the foliage is just starting. Try and get a lot of those puff adders, the big iconic snakes that are there.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's
That sounds like a good time. How long does your trips usually last? What's the duration?
Typically we aim for 7 to 10 days, depending. These are 7. I always stay a bit before and a bit after just to figure things out and do some herping on my own. But typically, when we're trying to fill a trip, people have their 9 to 5s or they have commitments back home. And this is something they can't normally just get out and do. And that's why they're coming on a tour because
Right.
they have saved up all this time off and it still only amounts to like a week, usually
Right.
in the
Right.
real
Right.
world. So Usually we can't push it longer than that unless it's somewhere really remote. Like my friend Daniel Solis, who ran this last trip with me, it was technically under his company, and I was just like a contractor with them. Jungle Diaries. I don't know if you guys have heard of that,
No.
but yeah, he doesn't do anything longer than I think 10 days unless you're going to Indonesia or something where you're island hopping a lot and you're moving around. Just because you're taking like 3 days just to get to that country. And then once you're in country, you're moving to each location, which is like hundreds of miles apart sometimes.
Right.
So you,
And
you
you
gotta
have to,
have at least
you
like
need
two
the time
weeks.
for that.
Yeah. Otherwise you just run around like a chicken with its head cut off to different
Yep.
habitats and not finding everything you could for being out there and
Right.
taking all the effort and money to get to that side of the world. So
And
This is
with your
kind of an
Zimbabwe
offbeat.
tours,
Go ahead, Bry.
and with your Zimbabwe tours, you are based in a central camp every night, and then from that camp you go out and herp, and then return at night, or go out at night, or whichever. But you return to the base camp was my question.
yeah. So I wasn't even really sure personally how I was gonna be, what our situation was. It was pretty much going in blind, even though I'd been there before. We actually ended up staying at a new spot, which was maybe a mile from where I'd originally stayed with a hunting crew. So that
Okay.
when I was out there, it had only been like four of us. So we stayed in like a really remote little camp essentially. But this time we had, I think, like eight to 10 people. So
Okay.
we just couldn't fit in that camp. We ended up actually staying at the Africa Center for Holistic Management, which has their own home base, which is like a beautiful compound. It has like straw bale hut style houses or housing, like four different ones with two rooms in each. And then we have a
Oh, that's
big,
awesome.
huge kitchen area. There's a courtyard. It was just super spacious, a lot of room for if you get venomous snakes, you can like work with them and in their little courtyard that has cut
Mm,
grass and it's just a
awesome.
good, safe place for a big group of people. But the downside, there were a lot of things that blindsided me, like the elephant problem out there with herping. The elephants do not like people because they're being hunted, and
Yep.
especially because they're being poached. The hunters, they barely take elephants compared to poachers. They're paying, they're only able, I think the whole country only gives out something like 75 tags for elephants every year, which sounds like a lot, but poachers are killing dozens of elephants every single day in that
Yeah.
region.
Yeah.
So
It's
they're,
way
yeah,
different.
and the trophy hunters, as much as I don't like them, a lot of their money is going back at least into the economy, whereas poachers are just feeding the black market. I wouldn't say that trophy hunter tags are going into conservation per se, because it's probably super corrupt, and especially in
Right.
Zimbabwe, and there's these
Right.
companies are taking most of the money. But when it comes to just money going into at least the economy, the poachers are not doing it. So it's terrible in that regard, but they're also really pissing off the elephants because they're so smart. They just hate people because of that. So
Yeah.
we were getting charged by elephants when we get out of the truck and we just try hiking. We would just hike for like 10 minutes and then we'd hear like the most deafening like scream or trumpet from an elephant that's only
Hmm.
like a football field away, and they go towards movement typically because they're not afraid of anything. They just hate certain sounds, so they're gonna move towards us, and we're already all freaked out. And it was funny because the first few nights we kind of thought that our guides were being overcautious, and like we're like, you can just let us out of the car, like we're gonna be fine. We have a gun, we have security. We're like, our idea was like, an elephant comes, we just scare it off with the gun. We have a rifle on us. It's
Yeah.
like, and it actually has elephant rounds, which are like they're like this big, like 50
Hmm.
caliber essentially, big, huge, round bullet. And I was just like, there's no way that we're not safe. And then we found our first elephant and it charged. And luckily we were in the truck when that happened, but that like shook us all. Like it feels like a T-Rex chasing you, like the ground shakes and the vibrations from it trumpeting are like in your like diaphragm,
Hmm.
and it's still like far from you, and the amount of distance that they can cover in like 5 seconds, they usually say you have about 3 to 5 seconds what from when you see an elephant to when it's on top of you to react. So that after that point when we understood like the how huge they are and the damage they can do, then we were afraid to get out of the car actually more than the guide. And they were stuck by the end of the trip, like they were trying to tell us it's okay. even though, and we like totally didn't trust him. They're like, don't worry, the elephants haven't been here in like 4 hours. We see this track, and the track is like aging, and we're like, oh hell no, we're not getting out of this thing. We're road cruising, dude. So that was a big issue out there, and that's why I think I understand there haven't been. That's another reason there just aren't many trips out there. But it's
Yeah.
also really cool in its own regard because it's maybe the only place in the world where you actually are hiking and there's some like you're on the menu for certain
Right.
animals and there's something that can just jump out and kill you at any point. There definitely is an added aspect of adventure because in Peru there's nothing in the Amazon that's going to kill you
No.
really.
No.
Disease and infection is it. Like jaguar is
Right.
not an issue whatsoever. No megafauna is an issue. Tapirs aren't going to trample you.
Yeah,
So
they're gonna come up and look for food from you. They're not
yeah,
gonna bother
yeah,
you.
exactly. So that was new for me, but I still love it, and I'm definitely it's just a challenge, not a challenge that I would love to tackle. So
Yeah, it sounds pretty amazing. I mean, coming face to face with the largest land mammal on the planet is something that not a lot of people can say. You know,
yeah, yeah, and
it's an
especially not in a
awe-inspiring moment,
national park.
especially in the wild. We've got thousands of people here in the United States that see elephants in zoos and stuff, but you don't understand. They're placid and calm, and they're usually used to being around people. But that wild animal can really do some damage to just about anything that's in its environment. It's a really powerful creature.
Yeah, yeah, and what was really cool for us out there too was we're not in a national park like doing a safari. We aren't in like Kruger where you just drive through and see it. We
Right.
were in the bush. There's no protection whatsoever from anything, and they're not elephants with like names that a million people see
Yeah.
every day that are shooting
Yeah.
their $10,000 cameras at, and these things like know people, but it
Yeah.
was more like these elephants have never even been given a second thought by humans, and other than people trying to scare them away with like brush fires from their crops.
Right.
So that was
Right.
really cool to like truly be like in the wild and seeing the
True
human
wild
like
animals.
wildlife conflict.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, it was great.
What's your plan for so you're returning to Zimbabwe soon, you said then, correct?
November, yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Oh, that's pretty soon
Yeah,
in,
relatively.
in terms of within a year.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you'll be so that's the second time you'll be back this year, correct? You went in the dry season, or no, you went in summer, and now you're going in spring.
Yeah, I went in late summer, which is their rainy season. So
Okay.
I guess all of their summer is more so. I guess you'd rather more accurately just call it rainy season,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
spring is kind of before the rains hit. So it's their winter basically is just dry. There's no rain,
Right.
and then
Right.
spring it starts to hit. So that the aim is to get there when there's on average 3 to 5 days of rain per month. That's the stats for
Right.
November.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
Right.
when we're gonna have stuff sprouting, but we're not gonna be like
It's not
obscured
going to be
vision.
overgrown. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I mean there were moments when we were out there. We saw I think six by the end of the trip, six adult Nile monitors, and we couldn't get our hands on a single one because they just book it. You see them from a mile away, and they just turn and gone. And you chase them into the jungle if you want, and into the brush,
Right.
but you're just not gonna get it. You're gonna get cut up. There's cat claw. You can get lost easy. Then there's the matter of lines and stuff. Then you
Yeah.
can't even go like more than 30, 50 feet off the trail, off the road. So just not convenient logistically unless I think it's not as overgrown. So
Yeah. Yeah. At least you can be a little more aware of the dangers that inhabit the non-overgrown underbrush versus the overgrown
mhm.
underbrush, which could literally house anything. It's
Yeah,
amazing how easy
yeah.
something like a lion can hide in relatively little cover. Um,
Oh yeah, it
yeah.
was that was one of the more nerve-wracking aspects because a lot of the time we're also walking through like saw blade grass that's
Oh,
taller than us, like 7.5 foot tall, and you're just trailblazing. You literally could be walking by a line like 10 feet to your right, and you'd have no
you'd have
idea.
no idea. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
and you don't really worry about it when you're with a group, especially when you're armed. But if you're in the back of the pack and you're like me, like stopping to take a piss, and then you're
Yeah.
like walking 30 feet behind everyone, then you start to wonder,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if they're
You're the
looking for
last one in the
something.
line.
Uh-huh, yeah. And
So
we had this added aspect of um I guess I don't want to say danger, but heightened awareness because when we were out there, the uh, the area we were in, it's relatively for the area, we're remote, but since we're staying in the Center for Holistic Management, if we were herping around the Center for Holistic Management, it's actually a little more dangerous because that area attracts all of these small game, like the impala, the
Right.
dik-tiks, the smaller deer, and because they know that humans mean safety for them as far as
Yeah.
predators. So because of that, all of the lions in the area they were telling us when they're injured or they're old and they're having a hard time getting their big prey, they actually come to that center and they stay in that general area where
Oh,
we were
goodness.
herping because they can't take down big prey like they used to, like sable or
Right.
kudu. So they're going to target all these little impala that live by human settlements.
True,
So
true man eaters, the ones that
yeah,
can't eat the game that's hard to kill. We're easy.
yeah,
We're easy
exactly. Like they
targets.
probably just pass us up because we're not any fun to hunt unless they
Yeah,
can't get
yeah.
anything else.
So as far as going to these different communities, these different areas, how does like the local communities view these tours and and people coming in and taking these tours? Like, have you had any
Um,
experiences with people
mhm.
that are local?
Yeah, they're very receptive in actually in every instance that I've seen. Sometimes apprehensive at first just because of the nature of what we're doing. Like we're looking for dangerous animals, like the probably the most feared things in those areas. Like snake bite in Africa is huge. You know, it's the number one neglected tropical disease in the old world. There's over 150,000 bites every year from them. And this, I think there's 30 to 40,000 deaths every year worldwide from snake bite. So people in the U.S., they really, when they're a little more sheltered, they don't realize that that's actually a huge, terrifying problem for the majority of the world. Um, and and it very well could mean death when you get bit by a snake out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have family members that have died. They have family members that lost fingers or hands, and they just see them as a total inconvenience and absolutely terrifying. So that hurdle is probably the hardest to get over. There's no really hurdle that I've experienced as far as people not wanting us there. Usually they're very intrigued. They love what we're doing by the end of the trip, and best case scenario, they're actually interested themselves. So we usually bring snake hooks, we bring flashlights, we bring field guides, all extras. And our guides that are with us, our local guides, or anyone that's really showing interest and they seem to enjoy what we're doing, we'll usually leave them with some of our stuff so they can do it for themselves and
Right.
get into it. And then that keeps that relationship going. Like I remember our guide, this kid, he's probably 17, 18 years old and didn't speak any English. He was, I think, the only guy there that didn't speak English, which because he was from the local community right next to us. And I mean, they're really out there. Like their big trips of the year are like going into Victoria Falls, which is like 20 miles away. That's like to them, that's like crazy. You know, if you live on a farm, like going to the mall for the day. They don't
Yeah.
have phones. They barely have electricity. They don't have running water for the most part, especially not clean running water. So I ended up leaving him my Snakes of Southern Africa book by Johan Moraes,
Okay.
and he was just so stoked because I could tell, even though all the other guys could talk and they were interested, and I had a lot more conversation verbally with them, this kid was like totally in on it by the end. Like his transformation throughout the trip was just totally different than everyone else's because he started from not even looking the first night, kind of just being there for security with the gun and just like staying in the car. So seeing us spot things and then getting his interest peaked, he's like, oh, well, I want to find something. But then he only was using one of our phones, flashlights to like look on the ground and like he's not gonna spot anything with a phone flashlight.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
then
yeah.
he was using the headlamp by the end of the trip, my buddy Daniels, and we're just like, screw it, let's just leave the headlamp. I'll leave my field guide so he knows what not to get bit by. We'll leave a
Yeah.
snake hook, and he's gonna be set. And he was so stoked by like when I left. I remember like looking back, and him and our cook for the trip were just like reading through the book and like pointing at things and saying, "Oh yeah, I've seen that. Oh, I didn't know that existed." and that was just super cool. So I love that. But then on another from another aspect, um, I would love to give back monetarily to these places and
Right.
really, because I mean, at the end of the day, like money talks, especially when people need money.
Yeah.
So, in Peru, we do that a lot too, where we try to pay all of our guides, anyone involved in what we're doing, logistics, transport, food, guides, double what they would make doing essentially anything else, which is like totally nothing out of our
Yeah.
pockets. Like we pay double and then like what anyone else would pay, and it's still half of what you would expect. So there's a dude in Peru that I work with. His name is Borean. Super crazy. He's probably the most interesting human that I know. He's an ex-miner. He's who we stay with, and he was doing illegal gold mining for decades in the Southwest Amazon on the Malinowski River,
Yep. Yep.
which has a very rich history. If you look into it, it's been essentially inhabitable or unvisitable by white people up until the past probably 5 to 10 years because the mining was so bad there. And I mean, they had little cities that they still do create, but it's in a lot more secrecy. Um, and it's like they'll have brothels, they'll have sex trafficking, they have drugs, and then they do their terrible mining, which is like essentially dumping mercury into the
Yes.
river. So
Destroying the
just
ecosystem. Yep.
yeah, just all around bad. And a lot of these guys that work there are even kidnapped by the mining companies to be like slave labor, and
To
they're
do it.
forced to be
Yeah.
there. Yeah, so a lot of it's terrible, all of it. And he got out of it because the founder of Tamandua, co-founder Paul, my buddy Paul Rosali, he met Borean. I don't know exactly how he ran into him, but he offered him. He's like, hey, if I know that this land you have in on this river, even though it's undeveloped and it's just jungle, primary jungle, if we plop a lodge right there, I can probably get a group of people and we can pay you twice what you would make just to take us in your home in your backyard. Like just
Yeah.
let us stay there. We'll put a lot of money up front into building this lodge and getting it proper for tourists, but once that's there, I mean it's you can just generate endless income and you don't have to feel bad about it. And
Yeah.
because
That's that's the
yeah, go ahead.
that's the beautiful part about what you're doing that I really liked so far, at least in your definitions of, or your explanations of it, is when you fund local people to uh, cater to their wildlife, their wild areas. You know, you're not just protecting the local people monetarily speaking, but um, you're also protecting natural areas, natural resources that otherwise might have been disrupted for some other process, like in the Amazon, in that example, the awful gold mining, right, would destroy the ecosystem. But you offering to supply the financial gain that they would get from the mining, but in a much different way, you're protecting that natural resource of the actual Amazon being pristine and left alone. And that's really, really important, especially this day and age with the amount of deforestation and just natural resources being used up by just about every human on the planet. It's
Mhm.
really important, especially in those really, really low income, impoverished places, because there's no way you're going to stop one of those families from going to exploit a natural resource if they can make money off of it. They have to feed their family just like everybody else on this planet. They're going to do what they need to do. And if you can give them a better option, if you can give them a better option that protects nature instead of destroys nature, it's always a good choice.
Yeah, yeah,
Always.
absolutely. And the main issue I think that we run into as far as real impact right now is just scaling that. You know,
Right.
for right now, it feels really good just making little differences like that. But at the end of the day, too, we have to like think of it from a logical standpoint of, yeah, we
Right.
can convert like this guy, but are we really making a tangible difference, like creating a Pantanal situation like in Brazil where you have truly like most locals in certain areas are relying on ecotourism, like for
Right.
jaguar spotting. Um, and not to say I would ever want to create that on that river because it's so pristine and there's just such you get into such muddy waters because you want to get all
Yeah.
these miners and all these people with land to like want to show this land and
Yeah.
just keep it pristine and bring people, but then you have the whole new problems of how do you do that with so many people? How do you
Yeah.
make enough land valuable to enough people that it really makes a huge difference and it changes the entire mindset of the society there.
Yeah.
And really like it's not even in the best case scenario, I don't think it would be like me or you changing their opinion, but it happens
No.
organically. You know,
Yeah.
it's, and they all know how awesome their land is. You know,
Yep.
Peruvians love Peru and they love the Amazon. It's just
Agreed.
that they've been put in such a position by people like the United States and China that they're forced in their own
Yep.
country that they're forced to take resources and
Yeah,
extract them.
they have to do it. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a matter of want to destroy. They don't want to destroy their ecosystems. It's a matter of they don't have a choice. The
Hmm.
what brings the economic gain to that country is something that could potentially be harmful. That's a forethought once it comes down to whether you get to feed your children or have a booming economy. And I completely understand that.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, it probably won't be a single moment in time that changes an entire group of people, regardless of where they are in the world. I always use the example of like, a lot of people in Africa where Nile crocodiles exist have to walk to get their water. There's no running water, and they have to walk 10 miles to the closest waterway. And even when they get to the waterway, there could be a Nile crocodile down there. They don't know. They have
Hmm.
to bend over. They have to potentially risk their life to get one thing that, most Americans have coming out of a tap in their kitchen. And it's a very different way to live. And unless you see it yourself or from experience, talk to people who have experienced it, you don't it's really hard to grasp as a citizen of the United States to understand that there could be a 10-foot or 12-foot Nile crocodile at the bottom of that creek that I have to get my water from. In the meantime, growing up on boats here in the Northeast and traveling waterways that would be very similar to say the Nile River in Egypt and just no worries of being harmed or eaten or any of those things happening. It's hard to tell people that nature is good when it tries to kill them on a daily basis.
Yep. Yep.
You don't,
Totally.
it's a very different conversation to say a farmer in the land that you were in, having to go through that tall sawgrass to do whatever property maintenance he might need to do to worry about being eaten by that lion. It's a really different experience outside of the United States, Europe, and a lot of places. When you get to these really rural, wild places that have animals that generally want to eat you,
Yeah.
it becomes a live, live for life situation. Like you said, the adrenaline, the experience, the adventure is all part of it. It makes it that much better.
Hmm.
But in the long run, trying to change a local person's opinion of it, like it's the greatest thing in the world to us because we've never experienced anything like that before. For them, they might have been almost crushed by an elephant 15 years ago trying to walk and get water. Like it's really hard
Yeah.
to tell them that nature's awesome. It's really a difficult scenario playing out for them to understand. So changing their mind is not going to be an individual conversation. It's going to be the scaling of a business like yours or multiple or however that's going to work out in the long run. Coming in and telling these people that their natural resources are worth way more kept safe and whole than they are the other way. And chances are it may not happen in our lifetime that situation
Yeah.
comes to pass, unfortunately. But even I don't want to take anything away from the single groups of people that you are converting to want to do this style of ecotourism, because that style of ecotourism, it may catch on. It may be more lucrative in the long run. As technology gets bigger, it's easier for people to travel. It's easier for people to look at us. We're in 3 different places in the United States right now, and we're all on the same centrally located Zoom call.
Yeah.
Um, and it's going to get the world is just getting closer, and the more that we can explain it, how important natural resources are to people in countries and places where the norm is destroying nature. Even here in the United States, we need to have that conversation at some point. So I don't think I'm just talking about third world countries. We do just as terrible stuff to our backyards as they're doing to theirs. Specifically here in the
Hmm.
Northeast, it was blow up rattlesnake dens. In the 1800s, you find rattlesnakes here in New York, blow them up, just
Jeez. I didn't know
dynamite their
that.
den and let them go, and then you'd get paid per carcass. from the government, the
Wow.
federal government. I actually somewhere have a stipend written by the federal government back then, and it was like $2 or $3 for
Wow.
in the 1800s. It was like $2 or $3 for, I think it was 5 carcasses or something like that is what it said on there. Can you imagine? I mean, $2 or three
That's
dollars
pretty
back
good.
then would have been like $500 or $600. It would have been a lot
Yeah.
of money. So here's what we did when we got here. We made it safe for us. And that's what all
Hmm.
people want to do with their living environment. They want to make it as safe as possible. Luckily, some
Exactly.
of these larger creatures still exist. And through conservation and management, we're doing a lot more to protect those things. And you had said something about the money for hunting the elephant earlier in this podcast not going directly to conservation. I think part of that, I agree. It's a lot of it's probably going into corrupt government and all of these other situations that you mentioned. But you had said something about they're cultivating the farmland very specifically to create it to be lush and awesome environments. So that money that goes to fund that hunt for that hunter to hunt that elephant is also going to that land management system. Even if
Hmm.
it's in a minuscule part by comparison, it's still going to the land and learning the processes to do it correctly and learning the process to keep it healthy and happy. I don't want animals to die, but I also don't want the world to die. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a very fine line. And, you know, like you said, poachers are killing hundreds of elephants a year by comparison to what a hunter does. And if the hunter's money is funding all of those elephants a place to live for the rest of their existence in nature, period, it's a hard trade, but I think it's an okay trade,
Me
at
too.
least for now. Until we can figure out how to make money not the root of all of this. It would be,
Yeah.
that would be the
Yeah.
best part of all of it, but it's just not going to happen in our lifetime at all. But yeah, I give you a lot of credit for what you do, taking on going to other places in the world and trying to change opinions, whether it was natural or a spark in yourself that you decided that you wanted to try and pursue this, and you're like, hey, maybe we can make herping trips out of this hunting trip instead of just coming out here to end an animal. Even that might be something they never even thought of before. Like, oh, you just want to come look at the animals? We don't understand that.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah, no, they were blown away. These
right,
these guys, I remember the first day making fun of us for flipping rocks, and I was just like they had no idea why we were flipping rocks, and the guy's like recording it on his phone, just laughing his ass off. So he's like, "Oh, I've never seen anyone actually care about like a flat rock on the ground. That's hilarious." But by the end of the
see,
trip, they're flipping their own rocks because they
right,
saw what
right,
we
right,
saw
right.
on there.
Right. And I mean, but that right there is the small group of people that you've already changed their entire opinion about their own environment. And that's a powerful thing. These people have
Mhm.
lived in these places their entire lives. And here's a group of tourists coming through and flipping rocks and doing things and changing the way that they view their landscape. Their landscape is no longer profitable in destruction. It now becomes profitable in life. And that's a great, great way to be. It's great. It's a great thing you're doing. I wish you very
Thank
much
you.
luck in the future. I hope everything takes off. I really do. And until
Thank you.
until my
Yeah.
kids are older, I can't go to Zimbabwe. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't have
Hey,
time for that right now.
hopefully it's a much more it's a much more streamlined experience by then. Right now it's just
Yeah.
a dumpster fire trying to find things.
Well, no, I mean, I'd be glad to run from some elephants. I don't know how fast I'd run, but I'm down.
Oh yeah, yeah.
um,
Same. It'll never get old.
Side note
No,
question, Brian, real quick. What's your battery at on your phone? I just want to be
my battery is at 21%, Mister
okay.
Mister Mister Greg.
Yeah.
We probably have another comfortable 15 minutes or so without
Okay.
risking the battery shutting off. My light did die. I had to change that out to another light. This one's much brighter and
Yeah.
blinding.
Um,
Nice.
so on the conservation topic, Ian, on your Instagram it says conservation photographer.
Hmm.
So what is that? So what exactly does that mean? Conservation photography.
So that's essentially storytelling, but with conservation in mind, through images, I would say. And I also would absolutely not claim to be one of like the top conservation photographers or even anyone with close to a maximum pull as far as impact with my photos. I haven't won any awards. I don't like sell prints like crazy or anything, but it's more that's almost more of a um personal pursuance, I guess, because it's not something that I make money with. It's not even really a career direction that I see because photography is one of the most saturated markets ever. And it always will be, I think. Not to say you can't make it in it, just like everything, you could say is saturated now. But it for me it's just always been like go out and find snakes and take nice photos of them. That's the whole part of the process of field herping for me is taking a photo of an animal, whether it's in situ or a nice pose or a macro of the face. Like it's a form of art at this point for me, and I'm trying to get a lot better. And it also makes a huge impact as far as the online space. That's probably where it gets the most pull right now. It's not selling prints or doing presentations or anything with all these photos. It's more so just posting them everywhere. They get shared. People comment, and it's a very slow rolling snowball compared to trips. Like, I lead an expedition, I can change someone's mind who's with me in 10 days. But
Yep.
by posting photos over and over, I'd say I met someone at the library and they followed me because and we talked about what we were doing with our lives, and they maybe thought it was kind of cool or it was intriguing if
Yep.
they hate snakes. And then they follow me and they like see him at first. A lot of people are like, DMing or commenting like they've just followed and they're like, oh hell no, that's crazy. Or like, I can't
Yep.
believe you do that shit. But then you wait a couple months and then you have people that are DMing you like, oh, how do you get those photos where it's blacked out in the back and the snake looks so good? And I'm like, well, the snake actually does just look that good. It's just that
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
like
Yep.
taking
Yep.
the time to
I
try to
actually
highlight it.
I actually might have actually asked you that like a year ago.
Oh,
I'll have to
really?
look back in my messages on Instagram because I did ask somebody about how they get the background and everything's so black, but yet the snake and is so like in focus and like bright and beautiful. You might have been that
Hmm.
person. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe. I will say I didn't figure out Flash until like the last year though. I was always shooting natural light because I was just didn't even want to. I don't want to jump off that cliff. To me, that was like something that was like to do off camera flash to get the right lighting, to get the settings on your camera. Like that was so overwhelming to think about. And then
Yeah.
one day I took the dive. I was in Ecuador with Jaime Culebras, who's a really well-renowned herpetologist, and he's a field expedition leader too. But he's one of the best. He actually has like pieces with frogs in Nat Geo last year. He had a whole spread in Nat Geo, and
Nice.
wow.
he gave us like a one-on-one photo workshop. And in literally an hour, I was taking photos I never dreamed I was capable of, or my camera was capable of, and all these
Amazing.
mental blocks were just gone. And that kind of like opened a whole new world and a new way of thinking for photography, where it's like, you're if you have even a basic camera with a decent macro lens or a 50 millimeter and a flash, there's nothing holding you back besides yourself. So
Yeah.
that's something I also try to push with people. It's like you can definitely get these photos too. You don't need to have a lot of money. You don't need to have the best gear. You don't even
Yep.
need that much knowledge. You just need to apply yourself like once and get it down and then go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
The
describes me
internet
perfectly.
is touting that entire string right there of, you don't need any fancy camera equipment. You just need to do it. Practice, learn what you can do, figure out how to use your own camera. I uh
Hmm.
I don't ever like to consider myself an amateur videographer, but I do process and create the Rescues YouTube channel, which if you go back and look at the first few episodes that I did, I mean, we're going back almost 2 years ago. The host of my channel looked like he was from Boca Raton because I had no idea how to set color properly, and like, it's one of those situations where you learn as you go. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you just got to do it to get better. And I never really believed that for 12 years of working, 12 years of YouTube being around and trying to want to do a YouTube channel, but never really pulling the trigger until COVID. I just all of a sudden sat down and did it, and I was like, man, those are awful videos, but I'm proud of them anyway. And I didn't even realize
Hmm.
they were awful until like a year ago, right? So you look back on it and you're like, nope, no, 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 no. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't. Why did I not correct that setting? Why did I not do that the right way? You know, why
Yeah,
did I have the light right there? It's a learning curve in all of life, and even working with reptiles in the direct sense of keeping them as captives. It's all a learning experience, and if it's not, you're doing it wrong. Period.
exactly. Yeah, that
Yep.
literally
Yep.
happens to me on a video, and each video basis that I make.
Yep.
Like whether it's one I just filmed for the American Muslim Association at their advocacy day, and that
Awesome.
video, I was like, I mean, I thought I did amazing filming, and then you see the end result and you love it maybe the first 5 times you watch it, and then you look back at it like a week later, and I was just like, God, I could have taken so much more creative liberty.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's the same with photos. But it's definitely like that's where appreciating the process comes in, because it's not about you getting to some
Right.
godly level. Because if you get there, you're not. That's not when you're going to be the happiest. It's definitely going to be
Right.
looking back at the whole string of ups and downs and the
Yep.
terrible cuts that you did and the weird music you used, and just
Yeah.
seeing like how it went from 0 to 100 over maybe a decade. But it's awesome. I love it. And my
Yep.
YouTube is
Yep.
terrible. I've never spent that much effort on YouTube, and I actually have like half my videos are private because I just have watched them like 5 years later. I mean, I think I started YouTube when I was like 13, so I have truly terrible
Gotcha.
footage on there.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Like, yeah, we're talking like 90s, like brick level, terrible looking GoPro, the first GoPro that ever came out footage. And yeah, some of that is, I just couldn't handle the public having it. But the other
Yeah,
ones,
I
I
felt
leave.
exactly the same way. I couldn't handle I have a couple of videos from when I first was licensed to own crocodilians in New York State. I was doing a few like feeding demonstrations like in my reptile room by myself, and I was like, I'm never showing the world this. This is ridiculous. You sound like an idiot. You look like a fool. Like, who feeds their crocodile to a call? Guess what? If I had posted that 12 years ago, we may not be having this conversation, you know?
Mhm.
It might have been a whole different life if I had done that. But regardless of that, I mean, I we usually have a moment in our podcasts where we talk about the future of the reptile industry, and most of our guests are more directly related in the keeping of reptiles, whether it be professional as a zookeeper or privately as a breeder or just a keeper in their own right, or educators and so on and so forth. My question to you with the reptile industry in general was going to be a little different than we asked them, because I don't think you have a direction of where the industry is going to go, kind of a take on it, because you're doing something that's so very different than what every other general reptile keeper we talk to does. Um, my question to you is going to be more of, what would you like to see happen in the United States for keeping reptiles? What would be your avenue of hope? Um, what would be? I mean, maybe not necessarily change, but just in general, what would you like to what would you like to either be part of changing or be part of understanding or pushing a message out there to try and get the general public that keeps reptiles or doesn't to understand the reptile industry as a whole? That's a
Yeah,
tough question. I'm sorry.
no, that's actually a great question. That does strangely apply to a lot of what I do too, because I would say 85% of people that I'm bringing on expeditions, they're breeders or they're keepers. They're mainly reptile industry people. You always
Right.
have the photographers, sometimes you have biologists, researchers, but the bulk of the trip is people that have kept reptiles forever and they love them, but they've never really seen them in the wild. So I do get a lot of intel on what's going on and what their lives are like, the the challenges of modern day reptile industry. But where I would love to see it go, and I always talk about this with them, and I would say 99% of people agree, but they just don't know how it's going to happen or what direction it's even going. Um, but I would like to see a more holistic approach to keeping reptiles and amphibians, especially like a more open mind to discovering what they truly, how they behave, what their natural history and ecology is in the wild. Because I swear, everywhere we go, every animal we see, it blows all expectations out of the water as far as what a keeper would imagine for seeing a Nile, where they would see or how they would see a Nile monitor in the wild, or an anaconda, or even in people that can keep hots, bushmaster. Like the behavior and the stereotypes that we have of basically every animal that is regularly bred or imported is completely false, or at the best, it's like half or a quarter of the story of that animal. Like people think that Niles are these arid species that live in like sandy or like sub-Saharan desert, and
Yeah.
they're like living in thick, almost jungle.
Yep.
There's even, I mean, they should be splitting the Nile into multiple species at this point because they're so different across their range. I
Right.
mean, I'm no scientist, but that you can see like serious differences, like genetic differences, population differences, locale differences in all these different species
Right.
across their range. And you see behavioral differences. Like we were seeing Niles that are 20 feet up in trees, and the second they see us, they just jump and dive into rivers and they stay underwater for like 30 minutes.
Wow.
So it's stuff like people would never expect that from that.
Right.
And that's just one example of a million. I mean, we find anacondas that are barely even going in the water. We find anacondas that never leave the water. We find anacondas that are fully nocturnal or that are diurnal. Like snakes are like people, they're
They all.
completely,
Yep.
yeah, they're just so diverse and complicated. And I mean, there's a few keepers I know of online that do take that approach. Like they have bioactives for rat snakes
Yep.
from Central America, or they have. I mean, we keep all bioactives here. Like my Viridis right here to my right, it's a little rough right now because it has a bunch of dead grass that I collected last summer. But for the most part, like we just try to mimic their natural habitat as best as possible. And I would
Awesome.
love to see that more because I can't say how many people I know that have almost like a hoarding problem, and they just need as many snakes as they can. They keep like Cribos in tubs, or they keep they even if you're a ball python breeder and you think it's like reasonable to keep a snake rack with like 50 that never see the light of day, and you just pull them out to like show customers or breed and put together or pull a shed off. Like these snakes are, I mean, ball pythons move in the wild. They're cruising across roads every evening. Typically, that's when they're active. They're what's the word? Not diurnal.
Crepuscular.
They're
Crepuscular.
crepuscular. Yes. Yeah, and it's a very regular thing that you'll see them in the morning, coming out, moving, going back to their burrow, and then same in the evening. And they can cover a lot of distance. Same with blood pythons. You see a lot of blood pythons moving in Borneo across roads at night. You can get like three in at night. My buddy just did. They were
That's
cruising, but
awesome.
people keep them in tubs because they'll tell you matter of factly, oh yeah, these things don't move. They're ambush predators. They just sit there all day. They don't care if they're just on bark in a big vision cage. But it's stuff like that. And I used to keep retics. I used to keep a lot of different snakes, and I was just as guilty as anyone else, thinking that my retic is happy and fine in a
Yep.
vision cage. But you go to the wild, you can track pythons that are moving literally miles over a week.
Right.
So I would love to see everyone shift to a more open mind and put in, like, if you're going to keep these rare animals or these high maintenance animals that are really intelligent, especially like cribos or cobras, like put in the work and travel to see them in the wild, take pictures of their habitat, study their habitat, the humidity, the temperature, when they're active, when they're not, what's their prey like, what are they doing, how are they acting, and try to mimic that as close as possible. I would even like to see more laws put in place, frankly, that almost require you to have a certain size for certain species of enclosure
Right.
and things
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I, that was the best answer you could have possibly given. Just so we're clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very
And
fair.
That's
honestly, no shade to previous guests. That was my favorite answer to a question like that
yep.
to date. That was
We,
great.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a great future for this industry. And it's not even so much the industry that I'm actually going to, I think would benefit from that scenario. I think that would be a benefit overall, regardless, but you're going to increase the benefit to the lives of the animals that we have in captivity, period. You know, at the end
Mm.
of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at it from a hobbyist perspective or a professional perspective. At the end of the day, you have animals in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 10 snakes, you're no different than a zoological company.
Yeah.
You do better than 10 rack systems, 10 rack tub or something like that. You can do better. I mean, I'm guilty of using racks when I was younger as well, but it's also a matter of being able to take in as many reptiles as humanly possible so that we can take them from whatever situations they're coming from, which is not always the best. But the rack will give them the heat, the cycles that they need, the humidity that they need, and the care. With me being able to keep them sterile back then, I use racks very, very sparingly now. But at the same time, we still do use minimalistic enclosures at times to make sure that we can keep environments sterile and safe for incoming animals. Things like mites, things like, just a little common stuff that could potentially, or nitivirus, any of these other things that could affect the rest of the room. They still need to be addressed. So not all of our animals are in giant, open, spacious enclosures, but we do have a lot of larger enclosures with a lot of the animals that I use for educational purposes within it. And a lot of them are bioactive. I love bioactive. It's a great, great thing. But when you keep an animal better in its enclosure, you're keeping the animal better regardless. And that specific change would really, really, really take a big negative, or a change like that would take a lot of the negative light off of the reptile industry. Where a lot of people are like, oh, snakes are, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. You shouldn't be keeping snakes, blah, 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 blah. If you're doing it in a zoological setting, how on earth could you possibly, unless you just don't like zoos too, which happens a lot, how could you have anything negative to say? Yes, you're breeding your ball python, but all 10 are set up in 4x2x2s. That's great. Who say anything negative about that? Who would you have to potentially, be able to argue the fact that you're doing something inhumane?
Exactly.
And I think that's a big part of it. We have humane laws for a lot of animals in the United States. However, there is no regulation of reptiles in the United States at all. As a point, I just looked at something. I was in a local pet store the other day. I won't mention any names of who because it is a big box store and I don't like to do that. But it said something like American Humane Certified or Certified Humane or something like that. So I took a picture of the tag and I was like, I'm really curious what this is. And I thought maybe it was an outside independent company that, checked their breeding practices or something because it was on a reptile enclosure. So I was like, oh, okay, so this pertains to me. Let's figure out what this is. No. What that is humanely sourced food.
Oh my God.
So, in other words, it's American Certified Humane for the way the animals were treated before they became food. It has nothing to do with the care of the breeding or whatever for the guinea pigs or reptiles that are in the care of that store. But that was a very clever plot that they tried to put a sticker on an enclosure of a reptile that said something so perfectly executed that if you even just scratch the surface a little bit, you'd realize they're completely full of shit. And that's the problem. It shouldn't be about the almighty dollar when you're selling an animal, period. Ever. I don't care. There's good breeders and there's bad breeders. Find good breeders. Find the breeder that's going to sell Petco or PetSmart 150 babies across 20 stores, but he'll answer the phone anytime any of them call. Find that person. Don't just rely on the wholesaler that sells them the cheapest because those animals are sick and dying. And it doesn't matter whether or not that pet store does anything in its own pet store to exacerbate that scenario. If they're just breeding in the beginning of this trickle down effect, if they're breeding just to breed for money, it's not the best interest of the animal. There's plenty of breeders out there that are breeding 1,000 different species that are specifically doing it because they want the longevity of the animal in captivity. Find them.
Yep. And same with importers. That's like a whole nother can of worms. But I know so many guys that import animals and they own pet shops, and yet and a lot of them, granted, like definitely I know that they have moral qualms about it and they try to do it as clean and clear as possible, and sustainable, if you will. But at the same time, it's like sustainable fishing, quote unquote, because you can have one guy doing sustainable fishing, but then you have 100 more guys saying they're doing it. And at that point, as a group, that's not sustainable. So It's the same with importing. Like you have all these guys that are bringing in maybe small shipments of like dragon snakes from Java, but at the end of the day, there's just some guy trying to get a couple bucks in Java, plucking every single dragon snake he can because he can get money for it. He doesn't care where it's going
Yep.
or how many different avenues
Yep.
it's going to take, and that's happening all across the world. And yet, these people, a lot of the importers, see no problem with that, and if they do, they're still doing it anyways
Yep.
because maybe they're trapped. Like they don't have a way out. That they've built a business, and now maybe their thoughts have
Right.
evolved into seeing it from a different light. But I
Yep.
mean, I definitely wouldn't say I know the solution either. You know, I
But
don't.
it's how they
I'm
feed
not.
their family. You know,
Yeah, and I'm
you
not
can't blame
against
them.
importing, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know what kind of regulation has happened, but I mean, it's terrible even in Africa. We were learning a lot about what people are doing there, and it's the Congo exports. So a
Yep.
lot of the surrounding countries, you have poachers. They'll even find species because of this. There's no regulation, barely. They'll find species that aren't even native to the Congo, like
Yep.
I don't know, black mambas in southern Africa, and they'll ship them all the way to that country and then export it from there and say
Export
it's
from
legal.
there. Yep.
So that's happening every day as we speak, and that's like just as degrading as resource extraction.
Correct.
So,
Correct. It's yeah. It's absolutely. If you take too many adult animals out of an ecosystem, you completely deplete the resource of that creature to breed properly in nature, and it becomes a very very negative thing. I agree
mhm,
completely. Yeah, I mean the only some places are really cracking down on it, and their strict laws are really coming for exportation of wildlife. It's I think as a global scale, as the world like we were talking about earlier gets smaller, I think a lot of countries are jumping on that bandwagon, and they're starting to realize that like, hey, we're not going to let this happen. There's too much negative complaints about it. There's too much negative press about it. There's too much, whatever the case may be, whatever's causing this. I highly doubt that it's motivated by saving their natural resources because most countries don't really look at that as a
mhm,
situation. Some do, but not a lot. Um, but it's still coming. We have millions of Australian animals here in the United States, and they haven't exported since like the late 70s, early 80s, or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yeah,
it's a constant thing where everything is being evaluated every year, but a lot of those middle African war torn countries or lawless countries in some cases really are probably never going to stop exporting. There isn't a centralized government big enough to be able to police that action, and it's definitely not on the forefront of everyone's mind where that animal came from. If you have to
mhm,
worry about, this different regime coming in and trying to kill everybody next year, you know what I mean? It's not a pressing matter for the Congo. It's not. They don't have to.
mhm,
They're just going to continue to export because it's a source of income for millions of people. You stop that, and who knows what'll happen in that country? That's the other side of that negative press or negative situation. But it
yeah,
is remarkable to talk about world situations when it comes to reptiles because it's not something that a lot of people think of when they look at their ball python. Where did this animal come from originally? How did it get there? Why is it here? But it is really important to understand that all of these animals have a natural variant and of originally came from the wild. Um,
mhm,
at the rescue, we do a lot of work to try and explain naturalistic stuff. When it comes to our care guides, when it comes to how we present information to people about pet reptiles, we're really trying to present it in a light that is more this is a wild animal versus this is a pet. Don't put a hat on it. Don't paint its toenails. It's not a
yeah,
pet. It's a wild animal. It's always going to be a wild animal. It will bite you. It could scratch you. It could hurt you. It is a wild animal. It's not going to cuddle you at the end of the day, and it's not a dog or a cat, right?
mhm, yep, that's
So
great.
it's a lot of that we get a lot of people saying some negative stuff about what we do because it's not anti-pet, but it's definitely like these are animals. This is not a pet. They're from nature. They're not domesticated like a dog or a cat. They don't care that you exist beyond food and water and keeping them properly in their proper environment. But you also have to really, take time to understand what that animal is and where it came from, what it can do, what it does do, and try to mimic it.
Mhm,
and give it as much of those possibilities for that natural behaviors to be exhibited anyway. For the first time in my adult life, I have a Savannah monitor that came in young enough that I worked with, and I've worked with for over a year and a half. And I'm telling you, the thing that the stuff that this lizard does is completely remarkably different. When I changed my behavior of, because I will grab anything. I'm not worried about being bitten. I worked with tons of big animals that could have put a real hurt on me. So I always just picked up Savannahs, and I didn't really ever worry about it, whether they were aggressive or assertive or defensive. I just grabbed them. And with this monitor, I took a different approach, and he trusts me. I can open up his enclosure. I can pet him anytime I want. But if anybody else does it, it's your food. If I do it, he understands that I mean no threat. So it's a very remarkable thing when you take the time to understand exactly what that animal's needs are, and you focus on the animal versus your need to have that animal. And you had mentioned it's hoarding, and yeah, to a point it is. I mean, 20 snakes is probably easier to handle than 20 cats, at least giving them the proper environment and health that they deserve, and feeding and all of those kinds of things. But at the same point in time, every time you get a new animal, the care for your other 8 or 10 or 12 diminishes just that much further. And I think that's a really strong statement to make, between having less animals and giving them bigger spaces and opportunities to exhibit natural behaviors, and having the enough willpower to say I don't need that new snake is really, really, really important too. Going to the expo is great, and walking around is great, and networking is great, but you don't have to leave with an animal.
Yeah. And with that said, there's like no world where I think a Savannah monitor should be on sale to like a 10-year-old for $50.
Correct.
That is bad news bears for the industry. So,
and the worst part about it is most of them are imports.
Yeah. Or the farm,
I think I know 2 or 3 people that genuinely have bred captive Savannahs. 2 or 3. That's it. That's all I know of for sure. And those babies are $200 a piece. Who's going to pay for the $200 a piece when you can get them for $20 at the expo?
Yeah.
The last expo that I attended, I walked past the table, and it was right around the same time that Theodore, the Savannah monitor that I have, was really starting to come out of his shell and be a lot more social and trusting of me. And I was like, man, $20 for a baby Savannah that was this big, I was like, I want to take all of them home and turn them into Theodores. And that I caught myself, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Hold on a second here, Brian. You're not thinking the right way while you're at this expo. And I think it's just a natural want to be able to have another animal, to be able to do that next thing, to be able to do that, whether it's a new experience for the keeper or whatever the case may be. I think it's just a hoarding situation once you get to that point. But it's such a fine line that nobody really knows what the point of hoarding would be, because I know people that have 30 snakes, and none of them are none of them are in bad conditions, none of them are in bad health. And then I know people that have 5 lizards that are like, I can't keep up with this. I have to rehome too. It happens constantly. It's a very big difference in what some people can make an easy, convenient a care system for their own personal animals versus somebody who has too many and gets overwhelmed. And it becomes a really hard thing to figure out. How many animals do you keep, Ian?
I only keep 2. I have an Arizona black rattlesnake and a prairie rattlesnake. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, they're my favorite little snakes. They're right by my bedside. And then I have a tarantula. But between myself and my roommates, I would imagine we're probably close to 30, somewhere around there, because they keep a lot more, and they actually kind of do exactly what I would do if I did keep that many snakes, which is like the same as you were saying. You can have that many snakes and not be a hoarder per se. Like, you can totally give all those snakes everything they need if you're just willing to, and you have the financial means and the space, which luckily we do. My roommates do. They take great care of all their animals. They have live bioactives, or at least like desert natural settings for all their animals. We have them on display. It's like a museum when you walk into our apartment. And
That's awesome.
so it's yeah, I love it, and it's great to live by them. You know, we're watching TV. We only have a 2-room apartment here, but there's just packed with cages everywhere. We keep them looking nice, but you know, you watch TV and you get rattlesnakes that are out basking to your right, and then you have lizards running to your left. So it just it is great, and I see the appeal, and I love it. Like it's like a win-win for me because I don't have to actually keep all those animals, but I still get to
Right.
experience them and live next to them. It's like the same with dogs. My roommates have 2 dogs, but I don't have the time of day at all ever for a dog. I'm gone like half the year. So it's great. I get to live with dogs, but I don't actually have to take care
You
of
don't have to
them.
do anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the love
So
and none of the responsibility.
exactly. I love it. I love it. But yeah, I see, like, you know, I'm in a very lucky position. Whereas if someone else wants that lifestyle, then you have to take all that responsibility on. So, I mean, you know, and there are this, it's like people are just so different. You can't really vet someone until
Yeah.
they have the chance. So I definitely wouldn't say, you know, from my opinion, we need to not let anyone have more than like 10 snakes or
Right. Yeah.
something
I don't think there
crazy.
should ever be a quantified cutoff point. Right. I know, like
Hmm.
we've talked about, I know there's plenty of people that can handle way more animals than I do, safely, effectively, clearly are good at it. And then you have other places that, you know, you might have a second hand, like in your case, you have roommates that have, you know, you have other people who can handle, care for, and do when you're away what the animal requires of them, which is great. Um, Putting that in place and being able to do that. And I'm assuming if your roommates go away, that you help them care for their animals if you happen to be there as well. So it's a good trade off, you know. But there should never ever be some kind of limit on captive
Yeah.
reptiles. You know, I don't think there in the United States. I don't think there's a dog or cat limit either, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
You know, I know working for a local SPCA and being part of humane law raids and things at times. Sometimes there's 100 cats in a 1 bedroom apartment. You know, that's too many cats. if
Yeah.
you ever had to question that,
Ooh,
100 cats in a 1 bedroom apartment is not enough.
I have two
That's too
cats and
many.
it's too many.
That's too many cats. We have
terrifying. Yeah,
three here.
I'm not a cat person. We got 1 cat, and that's about enough for me.
I'm good. I like cats. Cats are way easier than dogs. Um,
That's true. They are easier.
Yep,
Yeah.
my cat does nothing but, you know, he poops in a box. I got to clean it every once in a while. No big deal. A dog I'd have to like take outside and walk and be on his schedule, and that's a little bit much. I have 2 kids, so that's a little much for me to go. It'd be like adding a third kid that never grows up. Like I don't want to do that. Thank you. We're good.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
love the unconditional love of a dog. Don't get me wrong, but the sheer daily responsibility is a bit above my pay grade currently.
Yeah.
yep.
Maybe when the kids grow up and move out, maybe. But I am officially at 5%, and
Yeah.
my battery is slowly dying, gentlemen. This was a great podcast, though. I really, really appreciate you coming in. I mean, greatly appreciate it. You will probably hear from me in the future, likely on Instagram, I'm sure. Feel free to follow me at Hudson Valley Reptile and Hudson Valley Reptile Rescue, all underscores in between. I do
Got
not
it.
post anywhere near as beautiful pictures as you do, but you know, you'd be more than happy to see some of the stuff I'm sure that we do. Um, what
Love
else
to.
was I going to say? Greg, do you have anything to add? You probably have like 5 minutes at most.
Yeah, no, I just, I want to, echo what Brian just said anyway. Really appreciate you coming on. And I love focusing on more on conservation. And bringing, natural, like the natural environments of reptiles into keeping, versus just keeping a bunch of reptiles. And so I really appreciate you coming on and helping to kind of frame that a little bit more, because I do find it's a little bit challenging to sort of frame it, which is why I think this podcast is important. And having guests like you is important to be able to say, like, no, I can keep that animal. But I take my inspiration for how I keep them from stories and pictures and videos from people like you, so that's why it's very important, for me personally, to have someone like you on. So I really appreciate it. 100%. I appreciate it. And so what do you
Yeah,
see,
thank you.
what do you see for your own future, coming up? Just a brief little, rundown of what you want, in the short term.
Yeah, so I guess short term speaking, we're really trying to get this company off the ground, trying to, I mean, essentially my idea, um, from a basic standpoint is like just keep moving, making conversions like Zimbabwe across the world, as many different places as we can go as fast as possible because it is a race against time. We don't know how long until any amount of variables, World War III, or a drought because Arizona is losing all our water, or any amount of societal problems, the ecological collapse. We don't know how far away we are from that. So, and
Right.
for me, it's a fine balance between enjoying what I'm doing and having fun with it, but also working really hard to move fast and efficient and change the perspective of reptile field herping ecotourism